Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Darren Britton and I'm the National Assistive Technology Project Officer with the Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Education and Training, that is ADCET for short. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a white male in my mid-50s. We're getting there, etc., everything that goes with getting in your mid-50s, with greying blonde hair and a beard, more grey than blonde now. I'm wearing a red and white collared small checkered shirt and blue rimmed glasses. Just to let everybody know, this webinar is being recorded and live captioned, and to activate the captions, you can click on the CC button in the toolbar that's located either at the top or at the bottom of your screen. We also have captions available via a browser if you prefer, and they've just been put into chat there so that you can look at those separate to the actual webinar itself if needed. ADCET is hosted on Lutruwita, which is Tasmanian Aboriginal land, and in the spirit of reconciliation, ADCET respectfully acknowledges the Lutruwita nations and also recognises the Aboriginal history and culture of the land. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and to the many Aboriginal people that did not make elder status. I'd also like to acknowledge all the other countries and lands from participants that are joining us in this webinar today, and acknowledge their elders and ancestors and their legacy towards us, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. We'd encourage you to put into chat the lands that you're joining us from if you wish to as well. Okay, to the exciting part, today's panel session titled Exploring Inclusive Assessment Strategies at RMIT University, which will be presented by Elise Greenwood, Anna Branford and Teresa Dowding. And they'll be sharing their insights and experiences gained through conducting a series of educator workshops that are focused on removing barriers to assessment. And I'm sure we're all looking forward to what that is going to bring, and we're all aware of many barriers towards assessment. So thank you for your presentation today. But before we begin, just a few more housekeeping details. This webinar is being live captioned by Sharon from Captify Live. Thank you, Sharon, and is being recorded, and that recording will be made available on the ADCET website in the coming days. The presentation today, or the panel discussion, will run for around 45 minutes or so, and then there'll be time at the end, hopefully for a very vibrant discussion of Q&A. So please do put your questions into the Q&A box. Feel free to use the chat box to chat amongst yourself and each other. But again, if you've got a question, please put that into the chat box so that we can look at those at the end. And if you do want to chat with everybody in chat, please choose the everybody option so that everybody can read what you have to say. We'd also encourage people to use the react button, which is there in your little toolbar as well, so you can send some love hearts, thumbs up, applause to things. Our presenters often don't get to see the audience because they're looking at a screenshot, etc. That's there, so it's great just to know if something's resonating or if there's something that you like as we go along. So we'd encourage you to use that if you can. With that being said, thank you everybody, and thank you so much to Elise, Anna and Teresa, and I'll throw to you, Teresa, to kick us off.
Well, we like to start with an acknowledgement of country as well, and RMIT University acknowledges the people of the Woiwurrung and Bunurong language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of our university. We also respectfully acknowledge their ancestors and elders past and present, and acknowledge the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business. And we also acknowledge that Indigenous people across Australia have experienced poorer health outcomes where they have a disability due to the culturally the lack of culturally appropriate health services in this country historically and even today. This slide shows an artwork called Sentient by Holly Johnson. It features, she was a BA student at RMIT in 2016, and it features a series of lines that are interconnecting and diverging and going off in different directions, but also coming together in the red, black, green and navy blue colours that RMIT favour. And I like to think of this as the connections, the different pathways that we all take, but also the connections that we make and our intersectionality and where we converge and collaborate. I'm not sure if that's what her intention was, but that's how I see this artwork.
All right, I might quickly kick off with question. We've also put the wording of the questions up there for people to see what's being asked. So Teresa, Anna and Elise, would you each like to offer a brief introduction, including your current role at RMIT and how your work connects to inclusive assessment?
Okay, well, it starts with me, so let's go in order of our names because we haven't actually worked the order out very well. I'm a Caucasian woman with in my mid-50s, similar to Darren. However, I have well-dyed dark brown hair and a palish complexion, tealish coloured jumper on with a black collar from the shirt underneath. And what people cannot see, no one can see, are my red tartan fluffy slippers on my feet.
I'm Anna Branford. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a white woman in my early 50s. I have dark brown hair tied back, and I'm wearing a very pale pink top. I'm a careers educator in RMIT Centre for Education, Innovation and Quality. And my work there focuses on supporting educators and learning designers to embed career development learning into their curricula. There are more connections between that and the focus of what we'll be talking about today than you might think, but I think those will probably arise organically as we go.
I'm Elise. My pronouns are she, her. Today I have hot pink glasses on and a green silk shirt, and I've got fairly curly hair, I think. In terms of what I do at RMIT, my job title is Senior Education Practice Specialist, and I work in the Central Education Portfolio in the Centre for Education, Innovation and Quality with Anna. And in terms of my work, I'm working a lot with education initiatives and projects as an education subject matter expert. And I really love my job because I have the opportunity to work with our educators who are working directly with our students and with their assessment. So it's very exciting work and it's very collaborative. And so in terms of inclusive assessment, what I really love is bringing together that staff, student, and also industry experience and perspective in order to make the experiences better for everybody. And connecting together different perspectives and disciplines to really help broaden the way we design and assess and validate student learning.
And thank you, Elise. Look, I might just quickly mix up the order here and I'll start with you, Elise. So how are you defining inclusive assessment design at RMIT?
So I think really fascinatingly, we are adopting universal design for learning, but we've actually chosen to adopt the term inclusive assessment in terms of a term that maybe is easier for people to access across all different disciplines and cementing it as sort of business as usual. It's how we design, it's how we actually approach assessment. On this particular slide, there is an image which I love, which we actually generated in our generative artificial intelligence chatbot Val with the prompt: a fish, a monkey, an elephant, a duck, a penguin, a seal, a cat, and a dog in a line in front of a tree. And so that's what you see. You see all the animals in line under a tree. And so there's elephant, cat, penguin, monkey, giraffe. And at the top, there's this great phrase which says, for a fair assessment, everyone needs to climb that tree. And this image is really connected to a comic I once came across in my early education studies. And I tried to track down the original provenance. I couldn't find it, but apparently it may have come from a German textbook, according to Reddit. But this is how I think of and visualize inclusive assessment. This image really strikes me. In terms of all the definitions, I really like this article from Advanced HE, where they talk about it was originally focusing on disabled students, but inclusive assessment aims to really tackle assessment at the point of design. So looking at all the aspects from the development of the marking criteria to the method and mode and ways we give feedback to ensure the ways in which we assess do not exclude students. So we're adopting universal design for learning in our assessment practices, but trying to demystify it and make it accessible in terms of everyday practice. And I think Anna's going to talk to another great image from Val.
Sure. So this was an extension of the concept that Elise just explained in that beautiful image of the animals. I love that somebody in the chat has called it animal school. But in this image that is on the screen at the moment, we created it again using Val, which is RMIT's AI platform. Shows 3 animals gathered around a microphone, and they are a rabbit, a snail, and a bird. And the text that we've added to the image reads, "For a fair assessment, everyone needs to sing a song." And our suggestion here is that while requiring exactly the same task of everybody might sound like a kind of fairness, in fact, the bird is at a bit of an advantage here, while the snail and the rabbit are really going to struggle to compete at all, not because they are without abilities, but because what this represents is a task that can be disabling. So we're really interested in that idea that assessments can disable, but that they can also enable, support students to be able. And so inclusive assessment through this kind of lens is about anticipating potential barriers and removing them, carefully designing teaching and learning that supports and enables students. And this turns out to be a really critical role that educators can play.
It's fantastic. And Teresa works a lot with students. We felt like she would be really great at talking to this slide because there's just so many potential exclusionary barriers in assessment. So we're looking at a social model where the curriculum becomes disabling. And we actually are trying to look at how we remove those barriers to enable everybody to be able to thrive. So Teresa, did you want to speak to some of the ones we've been working through in our workshops?
Yeah, sure. So this slide shows an image of a typical construction barrier in front of a door, which is quite literally blocking the access to the door. And we use that to describe how, while we want to have inclusion assessments that include everyone, the flip side of that, or the opposite of that, are those that exclude. So there's quite a few when you think about it, when you start to drill down to it, and when you have an understanding of disability and how it might impact on people. So the number one here we've got is attendance requirements. When you have a disability, you're already battling. Almost everyone with a disability battles fatigue. So just turning up to campus sometimes is a lot harder for some people, and it's exhausting. And when they get there, they're tired. So they may not even be present when they're sitting in that environment. Visual or oral only information can obviously impact people who have impairments in either visual or oral impairments. Having inaccessible learning spaces is an obvious one, but also our inaccessibility within our IT spaces. So I think now that IT is as important to accessibility with disability as the physical space is. More and more so, it's becoming critical in terms of allowing people access. And if you've got inaccessible Canvas course content, or you've got, a recent one that we've come across is that some of our recordings just have an automatic shut-off point where they're not downloadable anymore, or they expire, if you put an expiry date on things. So there's lots of ways that things can become problematic for students with disability, but also students who have other factors impinging on their attendance or their ability to other things that they're juggling in life. Unclear assessment feedback, when people just say well done, or you didn't meet a rubric, being really specific about why you didn't meet the assessment criterias. And then there's the re-traumatizing, and this is my favourite one because this is one of the barriers. When the IDEA framework was developed at RMIT and they surveyed staff and students for both those cohorts, the number one barrier was attitudes. That was expressed. And that's really big. That encompasses a lot of things, but it can be simply a lack of belief in a person when they say that they have an ELP and they need this extension. An equitable learning plan is an ELP at RMIT. Or when they say that they have, when they try and describe what the challenge is for them, if that skepticism, if they're met with skepticism, that can really feel like a barrier for them. So managing those extension requests needs to be done with empathy and making it as smooth as possible.
On this slide, we have,
sorry.
yeah, it's an aerial view of the ocean reefs over the Great Barrier Reef. I think, Teresa, you actually know which island's depicted on this slide.
Do indeed. That's called Hart Island, but it's upside down.
Ah,
So, so this is a brain break slide, and in our workshop, in the slides, we built in brain break slides, and the theory behind that is that a brain break allows people to think and reflect on what they're hearing, to refocus. It allows for a bit of stretching, perhaps, for people so that they can be reinvigorated, and it's been shown, there's an evidence base behind it, that it's been shown to help retain information. So we've interspaced our slides with these brain breaks. And as far as that Hart Reef on the Great Barrier Reef goes, it's located in the Whitsundays, and it's a very popular proposal spot. So if anyone's thinking of popping the question, the Whitsundays should be on your bucket list in Australia. And the helicopter, if you tell the helicopter, they'll pause in exactly the right spot, so that you can make your proposal.
fantastic. So on the slide, we have a diagram, which is a circle. There's a series of circles. And the first circle says, interpret your students and discipline context. The second circle within the circle says, identify assessment outcome goals and purposes. This then connects into another circle, identify possible barriers to learning and assessment in the design. And then the next circle connecting into this cycle is identify approaches to remove barriers. And then the second last circle connecting into this cyclic circle is critically reflect on teaching and assessment. And the last one is revise and adjust assessment. And then connecting from here is a call out box, which says adopt individual assessment adjustments into your assessment design as part of continuous course improvements. And this visual representation is, we've named the inclusive thinking cycle. And we've got a link to a publicly version of this, which is on our repository. But we use this for framing in our workshops. And this is where we're moving from UDL into inclusive assessment design, where if you make a change for one student, let's now incorporate that into the design so all students can benefit. So we may have students who have equitable learning plans at RMIT, and there may be recommendations around adjustments for assessment. We feel that, to improve this as part of just everyday business as usual practice, we can tweak that design for everyone. So for example, if there was oral presentation assessment, including Teams captioning for everyone and including that in design, and then it just gets added into the design. And we're hoping this starts to reduce workload barriers and helps make it quite practical. And Anna, I think sometimes you have a bit to comment on this cycle. Did you want to comment anything or?
Only that I love how incremental it is. I always feel that when we present it, I see people relax because it's such a small tweak. It's intuitive. The work is already done by the time you've made the change for one person, and it makes such good intuitive sense to build it into the design process from there on.
And when we were framing this up in our workshops, we kind of aligned it with scholarly practice. So we have promotions mechanisms at RMIT. So connecting this as part of your scholarship of teaching and learning, that when we're starting to revise and make adjustments, we're actually sharing with the community and embedding it as part of other work processes. And this has been very well received by our educators, this approach, and then having educators start to share. So at RMIT, we actually have, a universal design for learning community of practice. We have a learning teaching technologies community of practice. We have a learning and teaching festival. Having educators then start to share the different tweaks and adjustments they've made and then incorporate into the design to help share that information across our educator community.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And just the way that relates to saying, making it multifaceted, how staff can get involved and the reasons for people wanting to get involved in these inclusive assessment practices will be different. We know every academic's different, as every student is as well. So, that approach that you're taking, I think, is fantastic. And I'd like to touch on, and I don't know how widely it's known, but I'm certainly a big fan of, and that's the RMIT's Inclusion, Diversity and Equity and Access Framework, known as the IDEA framework. And often tell people, go see what this framework is that RMIT's got there. So I'd just love if you can help explore that and unpack that a bit for everybody here about how is this framework helping to support improving these assessment practices as RMIT?
So I might jump in there. I know Teresa's got a lot to say with the idea framework, but what really surprised me, so these workshops actually came from a request from our educators. So we were out there running generative artificial intelligence in learning and teaching workshops with our educators, and educators said, we've got all these equitable learning plans. We need help. How do we make these adjustments? How do we help make it manageable? How do we improve the assessment experience for our students? And so we came back and I approached Teresa. I didn't know Teresa up until this point. And I kind of mentioned how, you know, could we potentially run some workshops with our educators looking at this? And Teresa said yes. And then Teresa, all her team said yes. And then we ended up bringing in all different subject matter expertise from different disciplines and, you know, from our analytics, including, you know, digital accessibility. I think the idea framework enabled everybody to say yes. And so that's how we came up with this idea of the idea framework being like a bridge that connects all the different people to make inclusive work and inclusive changes everybody's role at RMIT and everybody's work. So I think it was fantastic that everybody said yes. Now, Teresa, I know you've got a lot to say with the idea framework, so I'll let you go.
Well, that's good because I can cut out some of what I was going to say that was very reflective of that. But this is a picture of a slide, and I just had to have a little chuckle because when I first figured out the descriptor for it, I was saying, oh, it's a stone and cement slide spanning a river with a modern city in the background on a sunny day and some church spires. And then I thought, oh, I better just open that picture up and make sure that it's not a famous city because I don't want to embarrass myself by not knowing where that is. And that's the Yarra River, and that's Melbourne in the background. And that's the train station that I get off every day that I go into RMIT. So if there is a disability that's related to geographic challenges, I have definitely got it because I didn't recognise it at all. But building bridges is a fantastic way to describe the idea framework. The framework was developed before my time by the student equity team at RMIT under Lara Rafferty's guidance, and it was mainly an intersectional. There's so many different things we need to focus on in the inclusion space. And there's a lot of government attention to this now where we're being audited in different areas, but we're all saying the same thing, that we need to improve and embrace inclusion and diversity and accessibility at RMIT. And accessibility has to include cultural diversity and people's identity and diverse experiences, because if it doesn't include it, it's not accessible. And I think Australia Day is a prime example of that. If it's not appropriate for some people, then it's not accessible. So building bridges, yes, it's a wonderful way to describe the idea framework, because it shouldn't just sit with one team at the university. It needs to sit with everyone. Everyone needs to be part of it. And it's one of the cultural aspects of RMIT that I love the most, is that people have this wonderful collaborative way of working where they just come together and say yes. And I don't think I've experienced it in any other workplace, to be honest. When you're working in a project, often the business as usual parts of the organisation tend to say, no, leave us alone. And they don't want to be involved, whereas at RMIT I haven't experienced that. But yeah, people want to progress that action around solving some of these problems and what the priorities are. And inclusive assessments was pinpointed as one of the actions that was a high priority for us, because if we can get that right, we're on the way to solving some of the actual teaching practice and everything else that supports our assessment.
So I think what having a framework like this as an institution does is it allows everybody to prioritise the work. And I think it's really important. It gives everybody shared goals, shared language. So I don't think it happens by accident. And then it all gets reflected into the institution policy, the assessment policy, which are currently uplifting to help drive these inclusive initiatives. So it's really critical. So I think one of the key things I feel is you can't just go out and run workshops. You actually need these structural, organizational pillars that will help make it happen and help people prioritize it. Because what happened with our workshops as well, we just run them as optional, and then they started being run mandatory in colleges and schools for all staff to come and engage with and help, demystify and reduce biases within curriculum. So very critical. Anna, did you have anything to add?
I suppose I regard myself as a careers person, as somebody with whom a bridge has been built. And it's been incredible to find all of the connections between that future focus that a careers lens brings and the contextualizing of this kind of assessment and inclusivity more generally. One of the interesting ideas that we sometimes come up against is the idea that universities have to be like the real world. We can't make too many exceptions. It has to be the real world. And I think such a good question is, why would we not consider ourselves part of the real world and use our influence there as best we can? So I'm keen on the bridge image as well. I feel I've been a beneficiary of it at RMIT.
These are on the screen. We've got colourful umbrellas, green, blue, pink, orange, and they're all dangling on a very fine string, kind of across an alleyway in South Korea, I believe. Another brain break slide to bring your attention back into the space. Oh. It's the last question we have.
Excellent. I'll throw this out there, and this is the big one. So how did you approach, I suppose, the design and the delivery of the inclusive assessment workshops?
So on the slide, we have an image with a problem and somebody scratching their head with question marks. And it says, educators reporting challenges in making equitable assessment adjustments, how to do them and managing the workload. And also under that is students reporting facing barriers due to educator workloads and lack of awareness associated with inclusive practice and adjustments for assessment. So this is our problem situation. So we're getting educators reporting and, student consultation as part of the IDEA framework, and as well as connections with RUSU, our student union, really critical, I feel. They were the first to come to our workshop, which was lovely. And then, so in terms of like how we decided to approach it, so we decided to co-design, and co-design I think was really critical to these works. So, working with other discipline area of expertise. So working with your equitable learning services, working with your central education portfolio area, working with your college teams, working with your educators, and working with your students. And then I feel like it was a bit serendipitous, because one of the key things that happened when literally the week before had all these educators asking for help, I went to the UDL symposium here at RMIT in Melbourne, and I went to this amazing workshop by Justin Wiley from Central Queensland University. And it was really like problem-based student personas. So on this slide, you'll see there's a cycle with, again, different circles around it. And the first one was actually, the workshop design was open scholarship, with activities inspired by the ADCET UDL symposium, with student personas provided by ADCET and CEIQ University. Because what happens, I went to chat with Justin. He's like, I got these personas actually off Darren, got their permission to reuse, and we then adapted it based on our experience of working with students. And we used that to really build kind of a facilitated discussion workshop where you actually work through empathizing with these different student personas and example barriers within the curriculum. The next circle has a tree, which represents our signature pedagogy. So at RMIT, we have a signature pedagogy, which is active, authentic, and applied. And that's how we want all our learning and assessment experiences to be experienced. So we adopt that through problem-based learning, using these personas, using these a mock assessment, and also real educator curriculum to actually work through problems. The next one has exemplars, which has got a little example in a circle, where we actually implemented exemplars of assessments. So we later iterated and had a before and after assessment redesign. So we had the assessment task before, and then we provided an example of what it looked like after it went through an inclusive redesign. And we also had examples of working through removing barriers, how to design in student agency, which is actually the really critical careers section that Anna's really enabled. The next one's got like a computer and a mouse, which represents technology, because we've really leveraged technology to support the educators to design for different multimodal formats at scale and specific to our context and the technology we have here at RMIT. And the next one was including the inclusive thinking cycle, which has got like a bit of a circle with some up arrows that represents a cycle of improvement. And so using that inclusive thinking cycle approach. And the last one is a circle represented by a light bulb, which represents reflection. So the workshops really incorporated reflective questions to start to encourage knowledge sharing, because the key thing working in a central area is we're able to bring all the different disciplines together. And sometimes a particular strategy that may be used in fashion and textiles would actually be really useful to tweak for engineering. So bringing people together and sharing the knowledge, I think, has been really key to the work. Teresa, did you want to?
Yeah. So we talked about the barriers that people can have with designing inclusive assessments, but there are also some exemplars that are really important to just keep in your head whenever you're designing any assessments, particularly where you're doing a slideshow or anything where you're showing the visually displaying information. So use visual descriptions and of yourself and your pronouns, which I'm sure I forgot when I gave my visual description, because I always forget something. And also visual descriptions of the slide. So the slide I'm talking to at the moment shows pink tea tree flowers. I didn't need to look this one up. I recognise that immediately. They're a native species to the southern states of Australia. I think that one's in Tasmania, but we also have them in Victoria. And they're very pretty with two bees sitting on them. Create a safe space for the attendees and communicate that early. Communicate both the safe space and the setting expectations. So you're setting expectations of how you work together with your students and how they should work with their peers, but also the expectations of how the course is going to unfold, the kind of activities they'll be doing, when the assessments will be, how you manage your assessment extension requests, all of those things. Communicate it early and often, and communicate it in multiple formats. So verbally at the front of your classroom, in writing, and repeat it. Don't just do it once and think, but I told them. We all need information multiple times and in different formats. Use accessible font sizes in sizes above 16 when you're doing a presentation. I think it's above 12 when you're doing an email, but above 16 is the absolute minimum on a presentation. Use plain English where possible. Use colour, or pay attention to colour contrast with your, particularly any typing or written text. Build in your brain breaks into your class teaching as well as into your slide presentation. Always put alt formatting on the images so that people can click on that image and see what it's about, and make sure everything has screen reader compatibility. These should be your basics. I'd also like to add, whenever you're sending files to people, name the file. Name every file that you do, like whether it be a downloaded lecture. Don't just download it as a series of letters or however the computer decides to do it. Name it so that it's easy in plain English and students can find it. And I always find if you put 1 down to whatever count on any file, it puts it in a nice little order so everything is easy to find and locate for students.
So one thing we started to iterate on is really providing recommendations to support teaching workload. And we work directly with educators to try to come up with these sort of tips. So providing clear parameters to students. So you would have a word count on a report or an essay, put a time limit on voice and video recordings. At RMIT, we're very lucky. We have a colleague a few colleagues who have worked very hard to actually develop a student workload estimator app. It's fantastic. It allows all different types of learning activities or assessment types to actually be workloaded, measured according to text of volume of learning and credit points, and actually start to validate estimations around different types of multimodal formats and submission artifacts. Co-creating rubrics with students as part of the learning and really aligning them to different learning outcomes to make it consistent across different submission format types. Keeping things simple, using simple technologies, just allowing students to create and upload really basic videos or sound recordings on different devices they may have access to, like their phone or potentially a laptop. And if you really need to recommend complex technologies relevant to a particular discipline, make sure you provide support resources to guide student learning. So these are the kind of tips that we started to incorporate into the workshop to help address workload barriers. And I think connecting up with that as well, one thing we did in our workshops was really acknowledge staff workload. So it can take a bit of time now that rather than just doing that one adjustment for that one student, actually to tweak it into the whole design, but it's actually going to pay off in future for staff and students. And I'm not sure if you wanted to talk a bit about the practical example, the before and after assessment we redesigned and how it connects in with career development learning.
Yeah, sure. So, like I said in my introduction, I come to this space with a careers and employability lens. And for me, one of the really meaningful points of connection lies in that idea of student agency. So as a careers educator, I work all the time with the concept that all students can be using their time while they're at university to be really actively noticing what works for them, the strategies and the tools and the environments and the conditions that help them to thrive, but also the conditions and the methods that are a poorer fit for them. That is the way for everybody to design a brilliant career for themselves. It's about understanding your own strengths and identifying what it is that you need in order to succeed. And also it's about advocating for yourself to have those conditions in which you thrive. So a really important takeaway for me has been that kind of process of personal inquiry that sits right at the heart of effective careers planning for all students also aligns really, really closely with designing inclusive assessments. Both of those areas of higher education invite students to consider, to stretch into, to explore, to advocate for what they need in order to bring and to be their best selves, both as they study and as they go on to work.
And so we just really, the key takeaway in our workshop is we wanted to make sure it didn't feel like too much. We want to raise awareness, start to enable commitments to just one new practice, one new tweak, keeping it simple, keeping it replicable. And on this slide, we have a chicken and an egg, which is kind of representative of, did the chicken or the egg come first? Because we kind of feel like, do you set up your environment or what comes first? That's sort of what we were thinking around with that slide. Teresa, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just adding it into the into the chat. Sorry. One of the things that I really loved about running these workshops are the educator tips that we also got, and one we received was where students can struggle to meet a deadline. And some students really need that deadline. Neurodivergent students sometimes really need the deadline, but sometimes they struggle to reach it because of what they might be juggling at the time. And that lecturer had moved to providing a date range where something was due for submission. And that allowed, I loved that particular example because it gave the agency to the students in managing their assessment timetable. So we often give students extensions so that they can, and our team of advisors that coach our students in how to use their plan will encourage them to manage their timetable so that they're spreading their assessments out across an easier, more manageable time period, so they don't have a deadline where everything's due on the one day. But if teaching staff could provide the date range, it allows the student the agency to do that. It provides that power back to the student.
And I think student agency has been really critical lens that we wanted to enable through our student learning. So like not just the flexible time ranges, but we also used an exemplar from our pharmacy, Catherine Breverstock, an amazing educator here at RMIT, where students actually did negotiated assessments. And there's an amazing YouTube video, and I'll see if we can put the link in the chat, where students actually work through what they wanted to do and how they wanted to represent their learning. So students made models of a pharmacy annotating the different reasons why they designed their model the way it was based on different legislation. Other students entered a pharmacy competition. I'm trying to think what other examples were in that video, Teresa and Anna.
I'm putting it in the chat.
Amazing. So I do encourage you to student negotiated assessments and working with our students. So in terms of educator feedback, we've had a lot. Kind of growing in terms of like people come to the workshop and then actually can you come run it for our whole discipline. But I really liked this particular quote, which says, in terms of knowledges and skills, some of it was about becoming increasingly aware of barriers and also a better understanding of either solutions or pointers to solutions. My toolkit has improved and I'm just that bit more alert to discriminatory and inequitable design. Lastly, I left the workshop feeling like the task was possible rather than it all being too much, because there is, in all capitals, a lot to do in this space. So I feel like that was our goal, and I feel like it has helped. I think the work continues. There's probably practices we're doing that aren't inclusive now that we don't even realize aren't inclusive, and it's going to be continued growth cycle, I think, of scholarly practice. We have more feedback on the slide, but we really wanted to take the time to acknowledge Justin Wiley from CEIQ University for sharing the original scenarios that we used to develop the workshop, and also Darren Britton from ADCET, who provided some scenarios to Justin originally. I think that collaborative nature really helped us frame this up for our institution. And we really wanted to allow time for questions.
Look, thank you. Please, everybody, join me in saying thank you to start with for touching on this in such a very important topic there. So thank you, Teresa and Elise. I might just quickly, I just want to reflect on something you said, Anna, and then we'll get to some Q&A. And that was there around that agency. And from everything you're talking about, and I'm sure that you've looked at this as well, that agency discussion fits perfectly with staff as well. You know, we often treat staff as a homogenous bunch that all know they've all come with the same skills. They all know they've got the same workloads. They've got the same pressures and everything. They don't. So it's a lot of these workshops are, would you say, also giving agency to the staff, that it's a bit of that UDL. It's a +1. There's something I can do. Break down the fear, break down those things. So Tracy, you just put your hand up, so I might jump to you first then.
I really love that because I think we often forget that, yes, educator staff have a high workload and they've got a lot of pressure to deliver that workload, but we forget the importance of their inspiration as well and their motivation. And when they do something well and can see the outcome and can see the benefit, how inspiring that is for them. So I think, yes, we need to acknowledge the workload, but we also need to not back away from the fact that this is something that actually gives people a buzz. You know, when you talk about why do you enjoy your job, what are the things that give you a buzz? This is one of those things that will give you a buzz when you do it well. And I strongly encourage people to watch that video that we put the YouTube link into, because that's a classic example of an educator staff who really does enjoy that buzz.
Yeah, Anna, did you want to add to that, since you're talking about the student agency and seeing that from a development point of view with staff?
I think one of the things that's so interesting when you get the opportunity to talk a little bit more one-on-one with staff, like after the workshops or at the events that we go to, very often they're drawing on personal experience. It's surprising how often some of their teaching practice is based on an experience they had of feeling excluded as a student. So I agree with you, and I agree with Teresa that very personal connection with the work and that deep investment in it is palpable when these conversations come alive.
Absolutely. Elise, did you have anything to add? And then I'll run to the questions that we've got.
I think you jumped to questions. I think they've addressed it, yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, I might jump in. Beck has asked a question here. What does RMIT and other unis, I suppose, in terms of UDL and assessment, do in terms of assessment extensions for students? They're well aware that some other universities are doing with automatic extensions, not requiring documentation and evidence, etc. What's the policy at RMIT, and does that fit with these workshops of giving staff some flexibility?
Well, I'm very, very familiar with our policy because we're currently rewriting it and involved in that feedback process. So the current policy at RMIT is that all students do have an automatic 7 days that they can request. And we have an IT in the RMIT context. We have a Canvas extension request tool that all students can request their extension. Where a student has an equitable learning plan, they can request an additional 2 weeks above that 7 days. But they do need to show that they have an ELP. So the policy is that they can request it without needing to provide a reason. They just need to show that they have an ELP. They don't need to show the ELP itself. And then beyond that, if there is something more chronic or ongoing for a student, there's a special consideration request that where they do need to give further information. And that's because the workload involved in if educator staff are designing a scaffolded kind of curricula where they need to give feedback before they move on to the next thing, it can be really difficult to manage a 3-month extension within that course design. So there is that need to potentially provide them with a different assessment if they're going to require a significantly long period of time.
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. Melanie's asked here, how would a workshop targeted for HE versus pathways look like? And they've added to that, were the workshops open to vet educators, and did you find any differences in how you delivered them and the types of discussions that would come from those?
So we delivered them across HE and vet because we're dual sector at RMIT. I feel like it was received the same from my reflections of conversations with the educators. VE curriculum is quite different. It's competency based. And so often the curriculum is, set externally and then adapted, but the way you demonstrate competency really can align really nicely with universal design for learning. So it just sort of flowed really well, and we have some amazing educators across both HE and VE with great exemplars that I'm thinking of from the workshop that were already doing this practice, which was it was great to see. So it was about sharing their practice with other educators in the community. And I think we had a question come in from a registrant regarding the schooling. So my background, I was an English teacher in high school. I feel like these principles can totally be applied to a secondary school environment. Obviously, it's been a long time since I was in a primary school. But these principles work for learning because they help make sure that the learning is valid, because you're actually setting up the environments where people can really show what they can do. Whereas, that's why I'm taken back to that image of the tree. It just exemplifies what this is all about.
Meeting people where they're at. Yeah.
I'd just like to add that if the one thing that people did change, it actually sounds like a big thing, not a simple thing, but it can be simple, is allow people to express themselves in the way that plays to their strengths. So when you design an assessment, allow it to be something that allows the student to pick the mode that works for them, whether it's writing an essay or doing a podcast or doing a role modeled interview about a current event or history kind of subject, whatever it might be. And you can do that in high school, and you can do that in vet, and you can do that in higher ed.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Melanie and Naomi, for the question there. Juliana's got a question. You mentioned co-design, and I'm very interested in knowing how you achieved this. How and who did you invite to the co-design, and what are the challenges you found in this practice, and what are the possible solutions? So a really easy question.
It's about the bridge, I feel. I feel like because RMIT had the idea framework and it was known across our community, everybody said yes. So I feel like it's about the systems you set up at your institution in order to be able to make these things happen. So people can say, yes, this is in my workload. Yes, this is a priority. So the co-design, because of that, the way it's been set up at our institution actually was very easy. And I was surprised how easy it was. Anna and Teresa, what do you think?
I agree. And one thing I forgot to say is that the idea framework was an executive decision at the highest level that this is a strategic direction of RMIT. And I actually think it does come down to that. It's, one team could create an idea framework at any university or something similar, but it needs to have that buy-in from leadership and across all the colleges and campuses that you might have, because then it's got that authority, I guess, and that, yes, this is the way we want to go. It speaks to our values, and we're all working together, and it's not the sole responsibility of one group in the organisation. It's everyone's responsibility.
yeah, going back to that, everybody has a role to play in this. Look, I'm going to jump to Sarah, because there's been a couple of upvotes on this question. Are there any thoughts on students who struggle with that notion of student negotiated assessments, i.e. or e.g. when flexibility is a hindrance to their learning, because they see a number of neurodivergent students who really struggle to pin down ideas and choose, timeframes, etc., when they're given a wide range of options?
So with the assessment that we redesigned that allowed negotiation and choice, we actually provided a whole lot of support resources that actually scaffold students through working out what sort of things may work best for them, like reflecting on different times they may have had to negotiate, different times they may have had to express a challenging idea, and actually providing scaffolding and support. So people aren't just go choose your assessment. It's actually structured and supported and designed. I mean, Anna, you've actually had that implemented in curriculum. So you're coming from an educator view as well.
Yeah, so it's a tried and true method in careers to understand what might work best for you in the future. Think really carefully about what has worked in the past, where the challenges have been, and what you've found enabling, what's enabled you to thrive and bring your best self and your best work out of you. It's the same set of questions that we've built in here when students are choosing a mode, to think about where have they excelled in the past, when they've encountered similar challenges, when they've been trying to solve similar problems, what has worked for them. And that kind of meta process itself is a really important future focused skill to have. It's a brilliant set of ideas to be able to carry with you into the workforce, whatever your role there might be, as you tackle new problems, as we all must do.
And another thing I think that's really useful is stretching. So when do I want to actually stretch to actually try to do something that is actually really challenging and difficult? This whole idea about ungrading, we're starting to explore at RMIT. So removing your HD, your credit, and actually making it as inclusive in terms of to give people the opportunity to use learning and assessment to experiment in a safe place with support networks.
I love that idea. We'll unpack another webinar around that in the future, I'm sure. But that's a rabbit hole as well unto itself. But thank you. Look, and just very quickly, Christy's asked as well, the whole date range idea for assessments. This is fantastic. But how does this align with RMIT extension policy and student applications for extension? I know a lot of struggling with this idea.
I think the way correct me if I'm wrong, Elise, my memory of this, because we unpacked that a little bit at the time, was that the date range might be you've got from the 10th to the 20th of October to submit something, but the 20th of October is the cutoff date. And then the extension, if they need an extension beyond that, would be from the 20th on. Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah. So for example, there's a due date range actually designed in terms of marking allocation for staff. The whole work planning around that curriculum, it's actually designed in around a range rather than the strict date.
And it's something that we could do with our coaching of students as well, because you'd be surprised how many students actually think that the due date is this date and that's when they have to hand it in. And if they've finished it earlier, they don't actually think that they can hand it in earlier sometimes. So it's good to try to coach students from the get-go that this is a good way to manage your workload. But if we actually build that structure in, it's another way of coaching that.
Yeah, and I think that is important. I've known a few students that, get busy, get things done. It's in my mind, I'm doing it right now, get it out of the way, and then forget to submit it because it's a week away. And they've moved on to something else. And then they're like, I completely forgot. Yeah, but you're right. Sometimes some good reminders around it can certainly help. Look, I'm conscious of the time, and this is probably a loaded question from Marley, which I'll ask. So how is RMIT addressing the Gen AI assessment security challenges that unis are facing whilst keeping assessment inclusive, i.e. more oral assessments, invigilated exams, in person, all of those things? We can all roll our eyes together and say it's a big question, but I'll throw that out there. How's RMIT addressing that from an inclusive lens?
So I've been working a lot on the generative artificial intelligence. So I run both the Gen AI for educator workshops and the inclusive assessment workshops. So I'm working across both. And the reality is RMIT has chosen not to ban generative artificial intelligence. Our approach is we want to prepare our students to be able to use these tools, use them in order to be able to thrive in the future. So we have our own generative artificial intelligence tool. So we're not reverting back to exams, or we're actually looking at how to design assessments that align with the real world, the university world, the tools we have around us, just like we would any other tool. So it's really nice to work at RMIT where, you know, its student experience isn't being hindered by restrictive policies in response to generative artificial intelligence. It's very future focused, and I think that's really important, because, you know, attendance requirements with exams, there's so many barriers that can be brought up for students.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and I'll just quickly reflect back myself, and from something you've all brought up, and Anna, you were specifically saying, you know, why aren't our universities the real world?
Yeah.
We are the real world, and this
Yeah.
is what we're not only just preparing them for, but we might as well act like we're the real world. But often we don't. Oh, we're separate. We're not educating something mysterious, and it's different. And, you know, but we're wanting everybody to go through higher education as much as they can. You know, further learning, etc. So, you know, we should all start acting like we're in the real world, and maybe we'll achieve some great things. Look, I am conscious of the time, and we do want to finish just slightly early, so everybody's got a little bit of time back in their day to get to their next thing. So please, everybody, join me in thanking Teresa, Anna, and Elisa. And I'll quickly ask, any last words from any of you?
Just let go of the real world, because we don't. COVID proved to us that we have no idea what the real world's going to hold in 5 years' time. And pre-COVID, working from home wasn't really an option for many people, and that has really changed the real world. So just, it's okay that yes, uni is a part of the real world, but let's let it go as well.
Excellent, thank you. Hannah, anything from you?
Yes, reach out to your friendly careers staff. You'll be amazed at the bridges that can be built.
Words of great wisdom. Thank you. And Elise.
And I just think be kind. So be kind to educators, staff, students, industry. I think kindness can go a long way, and is inclusive.
And it's something we often forget. I often, you know, remind some staff, just because we're having a bad day doesn't mean our students have to have a bad day. And the same thing, just because they're having a bad day doesn't mean we have to inherit that bad day either. You know, we're all individuals, we're all on this planet, and, you know, we can find some common ground and fun in amongst all of this, and some joy, as they say. UDL principle. Anyway, so thank you once again for joining us. An email will be sent out to everybody when the recording of this webinar is available on the ADCET website. So please feel free to share this with your colleagues. And a big thank you to our captioner, Sharon, today for giving those live captions for us. We'd all ask that everybody complete a short survey on today's panel discussion webinar, and sign up to our newsletter. Links to that have been put into the chat box. And please save the date for our upcoming webinars. There's Neurodiversity Paradigm 101, Lessons from the Movement for Higher Education, which is on Wednesday, the 19th of November. And details for that are in the chat box as well. So please join me once again in thanking our three panelists today from RMIT on the wonderful work on the inclusive assessment workshops that are happening there. And thank you on behalf of ADCET, and please go enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.